in the Islamic accounts, there's a figure in Najd called Musaylima. And he's one of these central figures in the Ridda Wars. So you have a contestation that the sort of mainstream version of that might be a little off. What are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for asking this. This subject, actually intrigues me a lot, because it's close to home. I wish I had we had more time. I would have showed you where the battle was, and where the graves of the Sahaba are. The gravesite is still there. His name is Muslima bin Habib al-Hanafi. And Musaylima is, to make something smaller in Arabic, you sometimes add the ya, like kitab, kutayib, smaller than the kitab. So Musaylima is a miniaturing his name, as a way to insult him. So like the small Musaylima, basically. The small Maslama. So his name is Maslama. And it's a common name in Arabia. He After the death of the king of that that Yamama area, his name was Hoda bin Ali. That king was a Christian king, by the way. He died in the beginning of the advent of Islam. And after he died, Islam spread within the Banu Hanifa, the tribe of Banu Hanifa. And Maslama was a sort of a spiritual leader in that community, and he accepted Islam. However, he was known as the spiritual leader of Yamama before Islam. He was, what we know, he was a Christian. Other Muslim sources don't really talk about him at all before the advent of Islam, but when you sort of study the puzzle around it, it seems that he's a Christian because the king was a Christian. He was a spiritual leader, so most likely he was. When the advent of Islam came, he accepted Muhammad as the prophet. However, he claimed prophethood as well. And after the death of the prophet, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he claimed that he's a continuation of this prophecy. This is the historical account from all Muslim sources, that he claimed, he didn't deny Muhammad's prophecy, but he claimed prophecy, or the continuation of prophecy, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. There are other people who sort of have the counter history, about it, the counter understanding about it, because in Arabia there are many Christians, and the Christians of Arabia at that time, and it is documented. Of course, you had Christians in the central area, Al-Yamama. You had Christians in the northern part where Taghlib are, and where the Lachemids are. The Lachemids and the Ghassanids. Both of them were Christians. And then you had Najran, which was a city of Christians. So these were the sort of the hotspots. And Yemen, of course, they had a lot of Christians there, but these are the areas where the Christians were. So if you look into the language used in Arabic, when they describe sort of a priest, they would use the word that is similar to the word prophet or Nabi. Mm-hmm. So many would assume that, he wasn't necessarily claiming prophethood. He was merely sort of a priest of Islam, because that's the language that those people used. And this is many authors did claim this, but it's not the mainstream, obviously. But it is true that this is a word that the Arabs used to describe a spiritual leader, like a Rasul or a Nabi, even if he didn't have divine revelation. So many connect these two dots. So his story was, the mainstream story was that after the death of the prophet, he claimed prophethood. He claimed that when Banu Hanifa, the tribe where he's from, that are from Central Arabia, when they went to Mecca, they sent an emissary to Mecca, and they met the prophet. They accepted Islam, and he claimed that the emissary claimed that the Prophet promised, if Musaylima lives after the Prophet Muhammad, if Musaylima lives after the Prophet Muhammad, that he will be the continuation of the prophethood. And he's 30 years older than the Prophet Muhammad. He's the age of the Prophet's father. Of course, sources exaggerate. They say he died in the age of 140 and died, and this is obviously exaggerated. I assume that he died in his 80s, maybe in his 90s. He was described as a very old man during his death. The Prophet died in his 60s, so it makes sense that he was the age of the Prophet's father. The problem with the Islamic sources in history is that they tend to be very critical, and they don't see they haven't documented it in a academic manner, that the way they would have documented the hadith, or the way they have documented the history of the Prophet. If you read the revelation that he had, as they claim that he had, a book and revelation, and if you read it, you instantly understand that there's no way this man claimed this came from God and his people accepted it, because the Arabs were took language and eloquent language very important, and especially Najd. Najd is where all the poets came from. The mu'allaqat on the Kaaba, the writings of the poems on the Kaaba, all came from from poets from Najd. They weren't from Hijaz. Najd was very known for poetry. So to believe that this man brought these words and people took it was just silly, because if you read it, you say this is from a second grader. There's no way this guy wrote this. Like his verses would talk about the elephant with the long trunk, and it's so stupid and so silly. I mean, even in his time, there were poets from that same city that were absolutely phenomenal. So there's no way this guy wrote this. Probably attached to him later on with people basically taking him as as an insult, just making fun of him. Yeah.
So let's just hold on a sec. For anybody who's trying to kind of keep up and doesn't know what the terms are, so Najd refers to sort of Central Arabia, the region of Riyadh, and Hijaz is like the west coast, the region of like Mecca, Medina, Jeddah today.
Absolutely. Yep. Very well explained. The Banu Hanifa, his tribe, have lived there since 200 AD. They migrated from the Hijaz, in fact. Lived there 200 AD. So, and they still live there today. So, it's been a place where they live, and he came from that tribe. So, to follow on, what I think happened is, he might have, been a part of the political dispute that continued after the death of the Prophet, because after the death of the Prophet, many Muslims, rose and wanted to continue this leadership. They wanted to take the leadership. They didn't want to pay the tax to Abu Bakr and to Mecca. They wanted to be the center of the tax. Banu Hanifa was known, and the Yamama, the Najd, and that capital city, which is Hijr al-Yamama, where Muslima came from, was known to be more powerful in war than the Meccans. So I think they felt that they can pull it off, that they want to take the leadership of the Muslims. It was, in my view, a political dispute of not wanting to pay the zakat, or the tax to Mecca. He wasn't the only one that did that. He wasn't the first one also that sort of rebelled against Abu Bakr. That was Al-Aswad al-Ansi, that came from Yemen. He was the first one to actually claim prophethood. He claimed prophethood during the life of Muhammad, and he rejected the prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him. So he was the first one, and he was part of that apostasy wars. And the wars didn't start with the Banu Hanifa and Muslima or Maslama or Musaylima, whatever you want to call them, but it certainly ended in that final war, which was in Al-Yamama, the war against Musaylima. It was a very big war. It is counted as the war that killed most of the companions of the Prophet that memorized the Qur'an. That's why after that war, they rushed to sort of document the Qur'an, because they felt that we can't, people will die. So after that, Muslima was killed at that war in Al-Yamama. killed by Wahshi, the same guy that killed the uncle's prophet Hamza with a spear. And that is documented in poetry as well. He was a good-looking man, according to poetry, a big man. And the poetry, was very clear of who killed him, and that he, even in Muslim historical documentation, he did fight till the end. He didn't try to surrender or run away. So it is. I think the apostasy wars deserves, as its own episode, because it's really an interesting part of Islamic history. The whys, the whos, and what happened after. But at the end, Abu Bakr was able to unite the Arabian Peninsula and the Muslims, and gave way to the spread of the religion, ending the Persian Empire and fighting the Byzantines.